We are back on Taking Care of Business on Current Radio, News Talk, 1180, 1230, KGEO, 1410, KERI, and now in Albuquerque, New Mexico on 1000 KKIM. Our guest by phone, my mom, Antonio Basica, a member of that greatest generation who lived through the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands and ended up playing with Anne Frank as a child. They lived in the same neighborhood. Tom Brokaw, when he wrote the book The Greatest Generation, said, "They came of age during the Great Depression and the Second World War and went on to build modern America. Men and women whose everyday lives of duty, honor, achievement, and courage gave us the world we have today." When I read that, Mom, I think of Dad. I think of Pops. He was half German, half Czech. So when the Nazis took over Czechoslovakia and the war started, he ended up being special forces because he was expendable, because he was he wasn't a purebred. He was half German and half Czech. But, ever since he was a little kid, his dream was to come to America.
Yeah.
Yeah, which you finally helped him accomplish in, the end of 1960, beginning of 1961, which is when we came here from Canada. I was 10 at the time, so. But tell us a little bit about Dad. He was in the German Army, and I remember one of the stories, and I think we verified this with his friend Rudy not too long ago. There was a Jewish farmer, right?
Yeah.
And they had interrogated this farmer. He was Russian, because my dad was on the Russian front. And my stepfather was on the Russian front. And they interrogated him, and the captain turned around and said, okay, when they were done, he said, go out and shoot this guy now. And Pop said, no, I can't shoot him. And the captain said, either you shoot him or I'll shoot you both. What happened then, Mom?
Well, my husband went and he shot in the air. And he said to go.
Mm-hmm.
In the Czech language or in the Russian language, he said to go. Mm-hmm. And he went and kissed his dad's shoes.
Uh-huh.
Because he was so happy.
Yeah, so and this was I think this was in the Ukraine. It was a Jewish Russian farmer. So yeah. And then he took off and ran after that.
Yeah.
Dad had been shot 3 times. Once I remember he was shot. He had a little scar in his nose where he was shot through the nose, and that bullet went through and hit his buddy who was standing next to him and killed him. Hit him in the face.
Yeah.
And then he also he was wounded in the arm, and he was a tool and die maker all of his life, and they could have taken that shrapnel out of his arm, but there was a chance that he would have lost that the use of that arm. So he said, leave the shrapnel in there. So he only had limited movement on that left arm, didn't he?
Yeah. He did.
Yeah.
And he never he was working on the side of the Russians.
Mm-hmm.
Because he never left Russia.
Yeah, that's where he was the whole time.
Yeah.
I remember him saying he never went forward. He always went backwards, because by the time he got there, the Germans were in retreat. They were just working their way back to Germany.
Yeah, and the sergeant said to him, well, we are going to go backwards. And he said, no, we're going forwards, because they haven't been there yet. And he said, and the ocean was full of human bodies, and they had the nose cut off and the ears cut off.
Which is what the Russians did to the German prisoners.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Russians were as brutal as the Germans were.
Yeah.
I remember Dad talking about when they went into the Ukraine, the German army did. The Ukrainians at first treated them like liberators because, they were getting away from the Russians, and then the Ukrainians found out that the Germans were just as bad, if not worse. So, they ended up fighting against the Nazis and the Germans.
Yeah.
But and Dad wanted to get captured by the Americans because he knew he'd be treated fairly. If you got caught by the Russians, you ended up in Siberia someplace. So and when Dad went back to Czechoslovakia after the war was over, the Russians took over Czechoslovakia, And wasn't it one day, I guess, Dad was pretty outspoken, so one day a friend of his came to work and said, they're coming for you today. And when they came for you, you were gone. You never came back.
He never came. He went to Canada.
But he had to climb across the border in Austria and ended up in a relocation camp for a while.
Yeah.
Right? Yep.
And he went and he put his new suit on over his covered with coveralls. And he didn't say goodbye to his father.
Yeah, never saw his father again.
Never saw his father again.
Yep. We're having a conversation with a member of that greatest generation, Antonia Pasica, my mom, who lived through the Nazi occupation of the Netherlands. So then, in those days, the only way you could immigrate to the United States from Eastern Europe is actually you couldn't. So I remember the choices, Dad said, were Canada or Colombia. So he went to Canada, became a Canadian citizen, and then went to America as a Canadian citizen, which was a lot easier than trying to come across as a Czech.
Yeah.
So which is, and then you met Dad in Toronto, and then you guys got married and built a pretty good life here in the United States.
Yeah, he did.
Yeah. Well, he was, part of that generation where he never looked at the past. He just never talked much about the war, even though he went through some pretty horrendous experiences. But, came here and as a tool and die maker and built a pretty good life for his wife and 2 kids.
Yeah, he sure did.
Now, you have another little experience going on during the war. You met a Canadian soldier.
Yeah.
So who's my natural father, and he was a Canadian. I guess the Canadians were responsible for the Netherlands, right? That was their sphere of influence. So he met this young Dutch girl in Amsterdam, and you guys ended up having a short marriage. But the great thing about that marriage is you had this great son. Well, I'm glad things worked out the way they did because Pops was a great dad to me, and so it worked out best for both of us. So let me ask you a question about your generation, okay? It's been called the greatest generation because of everything you guys had to go through. Do you think, Mom, that the generation today could go through what you went through and survive and create the kind of incredible world you guys created?
A few people.
Uh-huh.
A few. Because they are have to set the mind on something, and they do it.
Uh-huh. Do you feel the younger generation isn't capable of doing that because they've had things handed to them?
Yeah, I think that if you work for it, you try to work real hard, and they give cars and everything else to the kids, and I think that's wrong.
Yeah, having things handed to you.
Yeah.
Well, and a lot of times, when you have to go through hard things like you and Pops went through, the Depression and the war, you come out of it and you appreciate things quite a bit more, and you're a lot more aware of what you have as opposed to taking it for granted.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, which unfortunately happens. One thing I thought was fascinating was, because I'm pretty close to Hans, my cousin from Amsterdam, and when they look at the United States, they don't look at the United States with the kind of love and affection that your generation did.
No, they don't.
Yeah, and why do you think that is? We had all that goodwill, and we've kind of ruined that as a nation, haven't we?
Because they think that they show off. More show off than anybody else.
The United States is?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's unfortunately a reputation that we've earned a lot of that. So, yeah. Well, Mom, I just want to say publicly that you've been a great mom, and I just it's amazing what your generation has accomplished, not only in America but throughout the world and throughout the Western world, and it's there's still a lot of lessons that we can learn, and I hope to some little degree this show we're doing today can maybe touch some people and get them to, maybe get the stories of people in their family that are part of this greatest generation, because, you guys aren't getting any younger.
No.
Yeah, not like me. I mean, you guys are getting older.
Yeah.
Well, I love you, Mom, and thanks for coming on the show. I appreciate it.
I was 17 and a half when the light turned off.
Yeah, there you go. Well, Mom, I'll talk to you soon, okay?
Okay.
Okay, love you, Mom.
Bye.
We'll be back in a moment on Taking Care of Business on Current Radio, News Talk, 1180.